Gosh, I missed recording all your what do you knows. But okay, the tea kettle was whistling. We could have the tea kettle whistling again in just a second, because I like that sound. And I asked you why the tea kettle was whistling, and a number of you said, well, because the water inside was being heated, and then the water inside, some of it turns to steam as it expands, and then that gaseous water comes out through this opening. There's a little tiny membrane in there, and that little tiny piece of metal vibrates, and when it vibrates, it creates a whistling sound. Is that one correct explanation for why the tea kettle's whistling? Yeah, it is. That's a reasonable explanation. Now, would it also, perhaps, we don't know, be a correct explanation to say, well, it's whistling because Mrs. Motry walked in here about 10 minutes ago, turned that tea kettle on, laughed, and she left. Could that also be a true explanation? Yeah. Why am I talking about tea kettles and biology again? Here's why I'm talking about tea kettles and biology. We're talking about biological evolution here. So, can two explanations simultaneously both be true? Yes, they can. We just experienced that for this here tea kettle. Now it should be cool enough I can put it back on its burner. We don't know who turned the tea kettle on. That's metaphorical in terms of biological evolution. Evolution is a way that in biology we explain the presence of all the species and all the diversity of life that we see on this planet. And in biology, we use the tools of science to explain that. And that's what we're going to walk through, is the tools and the evidence and the processes that science uses to explain the diversity of all life on the planet. Are there other ways to explain the diversity of life on the planet? You betcha. Religion and philosophy have their own ways of explaining that. Cultures throughout the ages, as long as there have been humans, we've been wondering why we're here, how we're here, what happened. There are creation myths in every single culture. I guess it wasn't cool enough yet. Those creation myths are who turned the tea kettle on. Can those be true explanations? Sure. Are they scientific explanations? No. The scientific part is the part that we can observe about the physical phenomena. The water is expanding because it's being heated. When it expands, it moves out through that narrow opening. It crosses the little metal membrane. It vibrates. We get a whistling sound. Here in biology, we can't figure out, we don't know who turned the tea kettle on. We don't much care. We're concerned with the physical, mechanical, biological description of how we get to the point of all the diversity of life on Earth. So, questions about who turned on the tea kettle are totally outside the realm of what we can address. And I think that's something that doesn't get said enough about scientific ways of explaining the universe. Can you have deeply held religious, philosophical, spiritual beliefs about how things came to be? Sure. And can you also attempt to understand the scientific, physical explanations for how those things came to be? Yeah. And you can do those at the same time. So I just find that that's a useful conversation to have as we start evolution, as we start talking about it. You think I can turn it back on yet? I'm thinking maybe not. So, with that, what does biological evolution say? So what we're doing here, this is notes, and this is a unit that is not directly out of a single part of the book. Okay? Over the years, I've built this. The material that we are working with comes from chapters roughly 13 to 15 in your textbook. And I've broken it up into chunks to sort of match the state standards, and we'll have a lot of sort of extra material that we pull in. But if you're looking for references in the textbook, this approximately goes chapters 13 through 15, pulling material from different parts of those chapters. So that's useful to know if you're using your textbook as a reference, and it's a very good reference. What is evolution? Well, at its simplest, it's biological change over generations. What the state standards say is that students will understand descent from a common ancestor is the biological explanation for the evolution of the diversity of life we see on Earth. Have you thought about what is living on this planet with you? Seriously, who here has watched a bug lately? This is one of my hobbies. My daughter and I were just watching cabbage moth caterpillars in the garden last night. I will say, we didn't just watch them, we smashed them once we pulled them off the kale plants. But, you know, they're fascinating. Who here lives with a non-human animal in their house? That means a pet, folks. Oh, good. Who here has seen a non-human animal living in someone's house? Gavin, you have homework. Yeah, you need to go find a non-human animal that's living in someone's house, aka a pet. Nah, not living, not an animal. So, I mean, look at the diversity of animal life we've got. From, you know, all kinds of insects, weird under the ocean, deep ocean creatures, glorious complicated primates such as yourselves, birds, bizarre, what's the rainbow mantis shrimp? I need to link to the oatmeal cartoon about it. They're, you know, these amazing things that lift millions of times their own body, and they're iridescent, and they live under the water, and they're ferocious predators, and they're like this long. You know, we're living on a planet with some crazy, wild diversity of life, let alone the plants we've got. There are trees in the mountains of California. Trees. Little, like, shrimpy-looking things that look like a bonsai tree that somebody stuck up on a mountaintop, and they're like 4,000 years old. We've got things like that. We've got teeny, tiny little... Who here has hiked down to Gretchen's Lock? Ah, I love Gretchen's Lock. I love that trail. And if you go down into the sort of pit of despair where all the water pools in the bottom on a relatively dry day, and you look at the walls of the lock, you'll see these little scaly green things growing, and they're a really primitive plant called a liverwort. And if you look really closely at them, they're amazingly beautiful. You'll see a picture of them in a little bit. They're a really primitive plant. You've got that, and you've got giant sequoia trees that are 500 feet tall that somehow manage to get water from the bottoms of their roots up to their crowns. And they shouldn't even be able to lift the water that high. The diversity of life on this planet is astounding. You've got bacteria that are shaped like corkscrews. You've got bacteria that can eat petroleum. Huh? We're living on this amazing planet with, oh my goodness, an amazing variety of species, and they're connected in complicated ways. What an astounding thing. How cool that we get to live here. This little planet makes me ridiculously happy. So the theory of biological evolution says that all of these amazing, diverse living things all have common ancestors. Does that seem crazy to you? Does it seem really weird that the ancestor of this giant tree could be, well, what is that? Some sort of bacteria-like organism. Does that seem reasonable in any way? It seems kind of crazy on the face of it, doesn't it? But does it seem crazy that this bacteria-like thing could give rise to other bacteria-like things? They're a little bit different from it? Doesn't seem crazy? I don't think so either. So, you know, a really simple bacteria, certainly there could be mutant offspring. We could, over time, over generations, have their offspring looking different. We kind of saw this somewhere. Seems familiar. Okay, so that doesn't seem too crazy. Well, what about this idea that these bacteria-like things could maybe be the ancestors of things like this? You know, unicellular, or, you know, in this case unicellular, in this case, you know, it's a compilation of a few cells. That doesn't seem totally crazy, does it? You know, or what about the idea that this unicellular protist could be the ancestor of things like this? That doesn't seem completely out of the question. Or that something like this could be the ancestor of things like this and this. This, by the way, are those liverworts that you can find down at Gretchen's Lock. You have to get up really close to them. They are so cool. They look like little bumpy alligator skins all stick into the wall. They're very primitive plants. Plants just like them have been around for millions of years. Okay, so that could be the ancestor of that. Okay, yeah, I can kind of buy that. It's not crazy. Or that this, our beautiful little liverwort friend, could be the ancestor of things like these. These are also primitive plants. mosses and horsetails respectively. That doesn't seem totally nuts to me. Does it to you? Or that something like this could be the ancestor of things like that. Yeah, that's not totally unreasonable. Or that something like this could give rise to offspring that eventually, over many generations, might look like these things. Or that this thing, there we are. We're at our big tree. Because we're not talking about going directly from this to this. We're talking about little, teeny, tiny changes over a long period of time that add up until eventually we end up with something like this. Whoa! Do I have to copy this? No. But I want you to be familiar with this term. This is what's called the phylogenetic tree of life. And a phylogenetic tree, we're gonna see the terms phylogenetic tree and cladogram. You already saw them in your vocab. You can take a picture of this if you want. And I should have worn my tomorrow I'll wear my shirt. The phylogenetic tree of life is a graphic way to look at how all living things on Earth are related. Notice that it's got a single root down here. That's that common ancestor. And as you have differences accumulate in ancestors, they get further apart on this tree. And so you get things that are really, really unrelated looking. You know, you get animals down here, and these are all different kinds of bacteria. So this whole thing here is all types of bacteria. These are also organisms that look just like bacteria to you and I. They're called archaebacteria or archaea. This chunk over here includes us, slime molds. Yeah, you feeling pretty good about yourself now? Fungus, plants. These are all little tiny organisms that you wouldn't recognize if you picked up a beaker of water out of a pond and they were in it. And all these things are related back to common ancestors. Now, how long does that take? I asked that question for a reason. The scale of time is unimaginably long for us, for humans. Because it is unimaginably long, I want to have some way to help you imagine it. So, in the groups at your tables, you are going to be constructing a timeline of Earth history. Let me pass those out. All right, now, the instructions say that you're going to do this on a long strip of copy paper. Oh, thank you, sir. Yeah, if you've got one of my styluses, I'd appreciate getting those brought back in as you get ready to work. I have found over the years of doing this that copy paper doesn't work so well. What you will use instead, which works remarkably well, you'd really be shocked, is white paper towel. So you'll cut off the length you need, you and your group, and then you will head out. You will need to go to the hall for this. I have meter sticks right there. You should do the pre-lab work before you do that, and I'll see if I can round up one more roll of paper towels while you do the pre-lab work. So the questions on the pre-lab are on the next page. You are more than welcome to use calculators. There's a whole bank of calculators. Ms. Adkins, would you do a little Vanna White thing there? They're right there. Okay, that works. Thank you. So you're welcome to use a calculator. Mr. Maple and I are going to float around and help you with the math. I always get confused with zeros. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, zeros are confusing. So count. Zeros. Okay, off you go.